My brother lied about our father's will and took everything. So I found the real documents and took the company while he watched Powerless. I'm a 32-year-old man, and I never thought my own brother would stab me in the back for money. My father, Richard Hall, built our family company from nothing, a small garage that grew into a respected construction firm. He used to say, "Family is the only thing that doesn't depreciate." I believed that. Maybe that's why what happened still feels like a bad dream I can't wake up from. When Dad passed after a long illness, I didn't think about the business or inheritance. I thought about the man who taught me how to build something from the ground up, literally and metaphorically. My brother Daniel handled everything during the funeral. He looked calm, almost composed, shaking hands, thanking guests. Meanwhile, I could barely stand without feeling hollow. At first I told myself everyone grieves differently, but there was something off about him, like he was already 2 steps ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. A few days after the funeral, I sat across from our family lawyer, Mr. Jensen. His tone was polite but guarded. "Your father's will is being handled privately," he said. I frowned. "Privately? Why? I'm his son. Shouldn't I be there?" Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, voice smooth as silk. "Don't worry about it, Ethan. Dad made everything clear to me before he passed. I'll handle the paperwork." I wanted to believe him. We'd always divided responsibilities. I managed operations, he handled public relations. It made sense he'd take the lead, at least for now. Still, when I looked at him, smiling that perfect politician's smile, something twisted in my gut. I brushed it off. I told myself grief was making me paranoid. But, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's death wasn't the only loss I'd suffer that month. A week passed before I heard anything more about the will. I tried to stay patient. Grief fogs time. But something about Daniel's silence gnawed at me. He'd been spending long hours at the office, meeting with advisors and consultants, while I handled the company's day-to-day operations like usual. Every time I asked about the estate, he brushed me off with a calm smile. "It's all being processed, Ethan. Legal stuff takes time." Then one morning, an envelope arrived at my apartment. The letter inside was short, cold, and devastating. It stated that all assets and business ownership had been legally transferred to Daniel Hall as the sole heir of our father's estate. My hands trembled as I read it again and again, trying to make sense of the words. I called Daniel immediately, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. He answered casually. "Oh, you got the notice?" "Yeah, Dad wanted things to be simple. One leader, one voice. He said you weren't ready to run the company alone." I could barely speak. "That's not possible, Daniel. Dad told me we'd share everything. He said we'd run it together." He sighed. That condescending exhale he used when we were kids. "Ethan, grief messes with memory. Trust me, this is what he wanted. I'm just doing what's best for the family." That line, "what's best for the family," hit me like a punch. I hung up without replying, my stomach in knots. Later that night I called Mom, hoping she'd clarify things. Her voice trembled. "Your father didn't want you boys fighting. Just accept what's done." Her words felt rehearsed, forced. That was the moment I realized this wasn't confusion or miscommunication. Something had been planned, and everyone but me seemed to know. The first time I walked back into the company after that letter, I could feel the shift, like the air itself had changed. People who used to greet me with smiles now avoided eye contact. My access card suddenly stopped working for the executive offices. When I finally got upstairs, the sign on the main door read CEO, Daniel Hall. I stood there for a long moment, realizing just how fast he'd moved. Inside, Daniel was sitting at our father's desk, leaning back like a king on his throne. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "I was going to call you. We're restructuring the leadership. I'll handle the vision. You can focus on field operations for now." I stared at him. "Field operations? I've been running this place for years. You can't just push me out." He smiled without warmth. "I'm not pushing you out. I'm simplifying. You've always been better with your hands than with numbers. Let me handle the big stuff." It was so calm, so calculated that I almost missed how cruel it was. He wasn't arguing. He was informing me that my place had been lowered, permanently. When I tried to push back, HR emailed me the next day. My title had officially changed, my salary cut in half. Whispers started circulating. Old employees and the ones loyal to Dad approached me quietly. "This doesn't feel right," one said. "Your father never would have left everything to Daniel." But nobody dared speak up publicly. Daniel had already begun reshaping the company culture. Loyalty to him was rewarded. Questioning him was career suicide. When I called the family lawyer, his assistant told me he'd retired unexpectedly and moved out of town. No forwarding address, no explanation. That night, staring at the old company logo on my work jacket, I realized something I'd been avoiding. My brother wasn't just lying, he was erasing me. The next few months felt like watching a stranger wear my father's legacy like a costume. Daniel started making public appearances, giving interviews, and bragging about his new direction for the company. The same company our father and I had built with sweat and sleepless nights. He spoke about modernizing and moving past outdated traditions, but what he really meant was stripping away everything that had my father's fingerprints on it. One afternoon, I drove past one of our family's oldest construction sites, a property Dad bought when he couldn't even afford new equipment. It was sold. Bulldozers were tearing it down to build luxury condos. I called Daniel, my voice shaking. "You sold it?" That was Dad's first project. He promised. "Ethan," he interrupted, calm and detached. "It was an emotional relic. Business isn't about nostalgia. You should know that," I clenched my jaw. "You're not honoring his legacy. You're gutting it," he chuckled softly. Maybe his legacy was holding us back. That line broke something in me. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was disrespect. He wasn't protecting Dad's memory. He was rewriting it to make himself the hero. I drove to our father's old office, desperate for something, anything, to prove what he was doing was wrong. The place was spotless, unnaturally so. Even the smell of Dad's aftershave was gone. But as I searched the shelves, I noticed one thing out of place. A small, locked cabinet behind the desk. It was half open, as if someone had broken into it. Inside lay a torn envelope, faded and yellowed. Written in my father's handwriting. "Private, will copy." The papers inside were missing. Only the envelope remained. I stood there in the dim light, staring at that empty shell of a document, my heart pounding with the horrible realization. Daniel hadn't just taken what was mine. He'd buried the truth with our father. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty envelope. "Private, will copy," mocking me. The next morning, I drove back to the office before sunrise, parked down the street, and just sat there, watching the building. I felt like an outsider spying on something that used to belong to me. My father built this company from grit and faith, and now my brother was turning it into something hollow. I started with the only lead I had, the people who'd been there when the will was supposedly signed. Mr. Jensen, our lawyer, was unreachable, but his old secretary still worked part-time at another firm downtown. I met her at a cafe, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. "Ethan," she whispered, glancing around. "I shouldn't say this, but Daniel came to see Mr. Jensen alone, a few days before your father passed. After that, everything changed. Mr. Jensen stopped talking about the original will." Her words chilled me. "Original will?" She nodded. "Your father made several drafts, but the last one, he said he'd finalized it with both of you present. He wanted it to be fair." I thanked her and left, my mind spinning. I drove to the county records office to check the will's registration. But the date didn't match my father's hospitalization records. It was stamped 2 weeks after his final stroke when he was barely conscious. My hands shook as I printed the document. The signature looked wrong. Too smooth, too confident. My father's handwriting near the end was shaky, uneven. This was different. That night I spread all the papers across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Every inconsistency screamed the same truth. Daniel hadn't inherited our father's empire. He'd stolen it, but without proof, my words would mean nothing. And I was just getting started. A few days later, I got an anonymous call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was old, raspy, but familiar. "Ethan, this is Harold. I used to handle your father's private paperwork back in the early days. We need to talk." We met that evening in a quiet diner just outside town. Harold looked older than I remembered. Thinner, tired, but when he spoke, his voice still carried weight. He slid a small notebook across the table. "Your father didn't trust electronic records," he said. "He kept track of every document he ever signed in here. I found it while cleaning my office." I flipped through the pages. Each entry was dated with detailed notes. And there it was. 2 weeks before his death. Final will signed. Stored with Allen & Price, secondary law firm, Seattle office. My pulse quickened. Seattle? That's 3 states away. Why would he send it there? Harold leaned in. Because he didn't trust Jensen anymore. He told me someone had been trying to pressure him into changing the will. He suspected Daniel. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My father knew. He knew Daniel was trying to manipulate him, and he took steps to protect his wishes. But somehow Daniel still got control. That meant only one thing. The real will never made it to probate. I left the diner with the notebook clutched to my chest, my heart racing with equal parts hope and rage. There was another version of the truth out there, one Daniel couldn't rewrite. For the first time in months, I felt purpose again. I wasn't powerless anymore. But as I started the long drive home, headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. The same car followed me for miles. Dark, silent, unmarked. And that's when it hit me. Daniel already knew I was looking. The next morning, I packed a small bag, grabbed Harold's notebook, and drove straight to Seattle. The road felt endless, a blur of gray asphalt and heavier thoughts. I kept replaying my father's words in my head, the ones he said before his last hospital stay. "Promise me, Ethan, you'll protect what's ours." At the time, I thought he meant the company. Now, I realized he'd meant something deeper. The truth itself. When I arrived at Allen & Price law firm, the receptionist looked skeptical when I asked about my father's file. "I'm sorry, sir, we can't disclose client information without legal authorization," she said politely. I showed my ID and the page from Harold's notebook, his signature at the bottom. That made her hesitate. After a long pause, she went to speak with someone inside. 10 agonizing minutes later, a senior partner, Mr. Lowell, appeared. "You're Richard Hall's son?" he asked quietly. When I nodded, he studied me for a moment, then said, "Follow me." He led me into a back office lined with locked cabinets. From one of them, he pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with time and marked, "Final Will, Confidential." My breath caught. My father's handwriting. The same looping R and H I'd seen all my life. Mr. Lowell opened the file and spread out the certified copy on the desk. There it was, my father's real will. Half of the company to me, half to Daniel, clear as day. "Your brother never filed this version," Mr. Lowell said grimly. He submitted an earlier draft, one that was unsigned. I stared at the papers, trembling, a mix of relief and fury burning in my chest. Proof. Finally, proof. But before I could speak, Mr. Lowell added quietly, "Be careful. Ethan, if your brother went this far, he won't stop now." And as I left the office clutching the envelope, I already knew he was right. I never made it home with the documents. About an hour outside Seattle, flashing red and blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror. I pulled over, confused. When the officer approached, his expression was firm, detached. "Ethan Hall?" he asked. I nodded, heart pounding. "You're under arrest for data theft and corporate trespassing." The world blurred. I tried explaining, shouting even, that it was my family's company, my father's documents. But they handcuffed me anyway, my protest drowned out by the sound of the cuffs snapping shut. Someone had filed a complaint against me. Daniel Hall. I spent the night in a freezing holding cell, my jacket taken, my hands trembling. The humiliation burned deeper than the cold. My father's name, our name, now tied to criminal charges. I thought of Daniel sitting comfortably in his office while I sat on a concrete bench. Replaying every moment I'd trusted him, the next morning, a bail officer told me the charges would likely be dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the damage was done. I'd been fingerprinted, booked, and shamed. By the time I got home, the story was already online. Business heir accused of stealing company data. My phone was full of messages, half pity, half gossip. Daniel called that evening. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Ethan, I warned you not to stir things up. Look what it's done. You're ruining Dad's reputation." I clenched my fists, shaking. "You did this to me," he sighed. "No, you did this to yourself." Then he hung up. That night, I sat alone in my dark apartment, the real will gone, confiscated by police for evidence. Every wall felt like it was closing in. My father's legacy, my dignity, my purpose, all stripped away. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to lose everything. And still, somewhere deep down, a tiny part of me refused to stay broken. For weeks, I lived in silence. No one returned my calls. My mother refused to speak to me, saying she couldn't handle more family embarrassment. My old co-workers avoided eye contact whenever I passed by. Daniel had won, or at least that's what it looked like. But pain has a strange way of sharpening focus, and mine turned into something cold, methodical, and unstoppable. I started piecing everything together again, using the only thing Daniel hadn't taken. My father's old notebook Harold gave me. It listed every accountant, lawyer, and witness involved with the company's legal affairs. I began contacting each one quietly, building a timeline of inconsistencies. That's when I met Claire, a junior accountant who'd recently quit under mysterious pressure. She hesitated at first, but after I swore to protect her identity, she told me everything. Daniel made me alter transfer dates and delete certain files, she confessed, voice trembling. He said it was about streamlining records, but I knew it was fraud. She handed me a flash drive. "This has backups of everything before he changed them." When I opened the files, I could barely breathe. There were scanned copies of both wills, the forged one Daniel used, and my father's authentic version from Allen and Price. The timestamps proved everything. Daniel's version was edited days after Dad's death. I knew this was my second chance. But instead of going to the police again, I reached out to a journalist who'd once covered my father's success story, a man who respected him. I sent him everything anonymously. Within a week, whispers started spreading online. Financial discrepancies, fraud allegations. Daniel's pristine image began to crack. I watched from the sidelines, quiet and patient, as truth started dripping into the world like water through stone. Daniel thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. 2 weeks later, Daniel hosted the company's annual shareholder meeting, a grand event meant to showcase innovation and family values. He'd invited press, investors, and community leaders. The same crowd that once admired my father now praised Daniel as his worthy successor. Watching the live stream from my laptop, I felt a bitter twist in my chest. But this time, I wasn't helpless. That morning, I'd sent a digital package to every major news outlet, the corporate board, and the SEC. Inside, every forged signature, every altered timestamp, every hidden financial trail. And at precisely 10 a.m., as Daniel began his speech, the headlines went live. Heir exposed in corporate forgery scandal. Hall construction empire built on lies. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The live stream's chat exploded. Journalists' phones rang off the hook, and the board members sitting behind Daniel began whispering frantically. He tried to keep talking, pretending nothing was happening, but his hands trembled. Then, one of the executives stood and interrupted him mid-sentence. "Mr. Hall," she said loudly, "care to explain why 2 versions of your father's will exist, one of which appears to be falsified?" The room went dead silent. Daniel's confident smile faltered, his jaw tightening. "That's absurd," he snapped. "Someone's spreading lies." But the evidence was undeniable, projected on the screen behind him by the board's IT staff who had received the same files. The audience gasped. His voice cracked as he tried to defend himself, but every word only made it worse. And then the camera caught him. The moment realization hit that his empire was collapsing. Live in front of everyone, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching the man who took everything from me finally choke on his own lies. For the first time since my father's death, I felt something close to peace. But it wasn't over yet. Not until the world saw what kind of man Daniel Hall truly was. The following days were a storm of headlines, lawsuits, and disbelief. News outlets camped outside the company headquarters. Employees leaked internal emails showing how Daniel had bullied staff into silence. Investors pulled out overnight. Within a week, Daniel was forced to step down, pending investigation. The same board that once applauded him now couldn't distance themselves fast enough. When the fraud investigation officially opened, the truth came out piece by piece. Daniel had used his position as executor to destroy the original will, falsify financial transfers, and move millions into offshore accounts. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Watching the reports felt surreal, like seeing a movie I never wanted to star in. My mother called me for the first time in months. Her voice was small, fragile. "Ethan, please don't let him go to prison. He's still your brother." I stared at the wall for a long time before answering. He stopped being my brother the moment he turned Dad's death into a business opportunity. Then I hung up. There was nothing left to say. Weeks later, the board offered me full control of the company. I walked into that same office Daniel once claimed as his throne. The smell of fake cologne still lingered. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. I reinstated every loyal employee Daniel had fired, raised their pay, and restored the company's old mission: integrity, family, and trust. When reporters asked if I had a statement about my brother, I simply said, "I don't believe in revenge. I believe in correction." But deep down, I knew the truth. Daniel's punishment wasn't the loss of power or money. It was watching everything he stole rebuilt, without him, without lies, and without a single trace of his name. Months passed, and the noise finally began to fade. The lawsuits settled, the headlines moved on, and for the first time in years, I could walk into my father's old office without feeling that ache in my chest. The sunlight streamed through the same windows where he used to stand with his coffee, saying, "Always build something that outlives you." For a long time, I thought he meant buildings. Now I knew he meant character. The company was stable again. Smaller, but cleaner. Every contract, every partnership was transparent and honest. I made sure of it. Employees started smiling again. Clients returned. And on the day we officially rebranded, I unveiled the new logo, RH Legacy Builders, in honor of the man who taught me the value of integrity over inheritance. I sometimes caught myself wondering where Daniel was. Rumor said he'd moved abroad, running small freelance work under a fake name. I didn't hate him anymore. Not really. Hatred ties you to someone. I wanted to be free. One evening, I visited my father's grave. I brought a copy of the real will and placed it beside the headstone, sealed in plastic. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "Blood doesn't always make family. Loyalty does." The wind rustled the trees, like he was answering in silence. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. Everything Daniel took from me, money, reputation, peace, had forced me to rebuild myself stronger. He inherited the company's shell, but I reclaimed its soul. That night, I finally slept without anger in my chest, because sometimes justice isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just watching the truth stand tall, long after the lies have crumbled into dust.